Hey guys, how's it going? Let's get this thing going here. Still loading my site. Let's see. Let's get this. So I'm doing a little render here, as you can tell. I'm just testing some of the HDRIs, and I can actually show you guys which one I'm using here if you want to try it out. So let's see. I'll just pause this entire thing. So that's basically what I have from yesterday to today. That's basically what I did. I ended up adding more detail in the face, but my pores got too small, you know. But in this case here, I'm not going to be using a lot of the pores because of the reasons I'm going to be showing you very soon. But yeah, I'm just like testing the lighting and seeing what I can get. You know, it's like basically like to be able to evaluate the silhouette and those relationships you're talking about when I was like doing some of the reviews online for you guys. I was like talking about like the corners of the eyes in relation to the nose and the mouth. It's like how deep those things go into the skull. So just like so I can evaluate things better, just doing some renders here. So let me jump right into this here. Let me just minimize it a little bit. And it's very plain right now. Like I said yesterday, it's like in areas where you're going to start adding the detail, for example, the cheeks and the chin in here, you see that the specular is starting to work a little better, although we don't have any specular map. But everything else, is like a little shiny, right? Because we don't have any way to break up the surface just yet. But then as we add all the parts together, it's going to start working. And this is a map that I borrowed from Stan Winston, so it's not even a map for him. And the map for him are going to be painting by hand next week to show you guys. But this is just something for me to see, so I can evaluate the likeness. It's still chasing it. In relation to what I posted last time, it's just like the only thing I changed, I think, was the base of the nose. I made it a bit wider, but there's a lot that's not quite there. But I'm going to be chasing it and doing some work as we talk today. So let's go to this website here. Let's go to this one. The one I pointed you guys to before, the Daniel blah, blah, blah faces. So if you go to this address and if you click like the face cartography, you're going to get to this gallery here. That's a bunch of different faces, right? And you probably already went through this before, but just to talk a little bit about it. Remember when I was talking about the quality of the skin, right? Like as you get older, that the pore is almost like dissolve, right? They become more like wrinkles. They start like stretching and they become very shallow actually. So instead of like that little butthole that we were sculpting for a couple of days, right? They're going to start looking like, they're going to basically like raise and that little, it's almost like the couch that we were talking about before, the button fell off, that little button that's holding the structure down. And basically like everything relaxed, so the pore actually, popped out a little bit. So in some of those cases, you're going to notice that the pore is still there, but it's so shallow that you can barely see it. So let's talk about this. So let's start with some examples here so we can see the skin, right? Let's start with the young person, for example, this dude here. And let's look at his skin from up close. And you're going to notice, go back here. Oh, no. There's let's see if I can click the little button a little faster because it kind of starts switching to the next one. Let's go. Come on. You guys are accessing all at the same time now. So it's, so it's slow. Let's see. Let's do it again. Let's see if it opens faster. Or we can start with this guy here, I don't mind. But let's start with this guy since it's already here. So let's look at his face here, right? The first thing you're gonna notice, like it's that some patterns is gonna be the same for most of the people. So certain things you can actually start taking notes, it's like, okay. And then you're gonna see how recurrent they are. For example, like this direction here, those little lines that you see in the bridge of the nose are here. It's like they are almost always there, right? Like independent of the type of person, you're gonna see those tiny little lines going across the bridge of the nose. And then the direction of the lines in here coming from the eyes, they always gonna go towards the middle, right? Like they're gonna start like flaring that way, and they're gonna start climbing this way. Sometimes you don't see those straight lines too straight. You're gonna see more of them going more diagonally. Same here, right? And then certain things, for example, like those bumps, when it comes to the corners of the eyes, you're gonna see like lots of little bumps. This guy even, it doesn't have a lot of them, but in some other people, you're gonna see lots of little bumps around here. And then obviously the direction of the wrinkles, right? Like the way that things, it's almost like it's telling you how a squint works in here, you know, it's like those lines, because the squint's gonna happen that way, right? You're gonna be compressing the corner of the eye towards the center in here. And those lines are actually following the direction of the squint right there. And then obviously here in this area, you're gonna see the pores that we were sculpting, which is like mostly cheeks, right? So it's gonna have that orange peel kind of effect. Some of them are stretched in here, right? Like you see some stretching going on. And then in this area here, the same, you're gonna see a lot of them. And especially because of in this case here, the beard, right? So those little pores gonna be holding those pieces of hair in there. And then when it comes to the chin, in this case here, you cannot see very much, but the chin has an interesting pattern that goes in this direction here. So it comes like, it follows the contour of the chin, and then it goes like perpendicular like that. So you're gonna see, it's almost like a checkerboard sometimes. It's very faint, you know, it's like you have to look really closely. But like with younger people, you're gonna see that kind of pattern. That's the stretch going that way, and then coming this opposite way as well. And then in terms of, you know, detail, when you see like an older guy, for example, like a smoker, you're gonna see more of those lines going perpendicular to the lips in here. So it's kind of like almost like if you have a circle representing the muscles around the lips, right? Perpendicular to the fibers of the muscle, you're gonna see those lines forming. So you're gonna see like, you know, the kind of like that mouth that you do when you smoke a cigarette, right? Like you kind of like make this little, you know, it's like O shape with your mouth. So you're gonna see almost like when it's a smoker, you're gonna see lots of those lines, almost like, you know, it's like making this little, creating those wrinkles by you know, it's like sucking on the cigarette. So let's look at some. Let's try to get this guy here again. Let's see if I can zoom in. For some reason, it's not allowing me to click that zoom in. Let's see, why is that? It's actually popping out. I'm gonna zoom in my other monitor because I know that one works. And then I'm gonna just bring it back here. So zoom in, let's come back here. And so let's look at his face. So from up close, that's basically what we're sculpting right now, right? Like the orange peel effect, and we have a lot of micro breakup in between them. So a lot of that micro breakup we are getting with the actual, you know, the little legs that we have like sculpted around the wrinkle, right? Kind of like connecting to the next, to the neighbor. But a lot of stuff is gonna come from a micro breakup that we might use, you know, it's like from either from some procedure in Maya, or some map that we painted, or something from that website, right? Or even a third option is to actually just like sculpt the micro detail in between if you have enough resolution, right? So the patterns we were observing before, so we're gonna go around here. You're gonna see again the micro lines, right? Going that very horizontally right here. They're very thin, and then depending on the person, I mean, like you know, with the frowning, you know, it's like you know, it's like you're frowning, or if you're create like an angry face or something like that. That's basically like an indication of that, right? So those wrinkles is going to be compressing against each other right here in the middle. So when the eyebrows, when they are angry, right, they go against each other right here. So we have this direction represented in there, almost like a memory of the facial expression, right? Same for the squint. You're going to have those lines indicating the squint in here, and then. Even sometimes you can actually see some lines crossing around here, going this direction down diagonal, because again, like if you're making an angry face, you're kind of like creating a snarl, you know, and bringing your nose up and compressing this entire area, so you can see some of the echo of that expression as well. So this is recurrent. So those ones you can see they're recurrent because they're being formed by that expression, right? So you're going to see those lines going up, and then they're going to go very, very vertically sometimes. And then you're going to get those other ones here coming very horizontally, almost like like a faint representation of the lines, the wrinkles that we have in the forehead, right? So it's almost like when they compress like those bigger forms, it creates a smaller version of themselves, like a micro compression, like in between, right? So you get those other lines. So those are always like a marks and like a memory of the expressions we make, right? So that's why you have all those wrinkles in there. When it comes to wrinkles around, let's say, the nasolabial, you see how they are formed in here? It's not like a straight line, right? And it's not a random thing like normally people sculpt, you know. It's like you just create this straight line that goes across all the detail without paying attention. This is basically like the path of least resistance that I mentioned the other day. And I was like, if you have the pores in there, those lines are going to break on top of those pores. And basically, like, you're going to play the connected dots game, right? Like trying to connect each one of them to the next one, to the neighbor, to create those very, very long wrinkles, for example. So as you can see here, for example, we have the orange peel, right? That's very evident in there. Is a younger person. You're going to see the same for males and females. For females, going to be probably a little bit nicer than this. Males normally like a little bit more open pores and a little bit more brute, but females are a little bit more nicer in there. It depends on the person as well. So I've seen like both, you know, some dudes with very, very soft pores, and then some beautiful women actually with like very deep pores as well. So it varies, but so here are the lines that I was mentioning before. So basically, like you see, it follows the contour of the face right here. So those lines are coming this way. And then you're gonna see those lines coming that way. So it's almost like, if you look closely here, it's almost like a little grid. So you can see like almost like diagonal more vertical and diagonal more horizontal lines, right? But then this guy here has some beard, so I cannot see it very much. This area here, you probably would see very similar pores as you see around here. So this type of pores you're probably going to see in the chin of like a younger person. And then when it comes more closer, a little closer to the mouth in here, they kind of like, they are not that visible, but sometimes you can see them very clearly as well in here. When I sculpt my stuff, I try to sculpt everything with the same type of pores, and then just change the character of the pores as I approach like those different areas, either by raising them a little bit, smoothing things out, and then adding some other type of detail, you know. That's a gross thing right there. Look at the guy has something in there, his lip. And then this is another thing that happens, for example, like a younger person, you're gonna see all those little lines very well defined in here, right? They're very tiny. So I normally sculpt those lines as well when I'm, you know, building like a younger stuff. Like for example, like with Rick Baker, he sculpted all those little lines in there. But then you're gonna see some examples of older people. Those lines become less and less complex. They kind of like, they almost like blend together, and they become bigger forms. So you're gonna see like bigger forms instead of that. Same goes for like the wrinkles in here. I don't know if you ever noticed those very old dudes who had worked like under the sun for a long, like a lifetime, right? And everything becomes almost like a brain kind of thing. I even sculpted a guy like that not long ago. It's almost like the texture looks like a brain, because all those things, those forms here, they kind of like mesh together and become like bigger forms, right? But like I said before, like there's a lot of recurrent stuff, you know, that you're gonna see those guys. And then the last one, let's just look at one more, like a female. Let's see a woman here. And just compare as well. Let's pick one like random here. Let's see, this girl looks like a Britney Spears. I cannot open that one. Let me just do this. I don't know why my monitor in there doesn't allow me to. Just a Firefox bug, I guess. So female in here. I don't think I ever looked at this one, but you see like the pores are a little bit more delicate, right? They're kind of like a little bit more raised and less deep, right? But like I said before, you're going to find all kinds of variations. There's a website that was looking just, let's see, cheeks. I just put like cheeks pores, right? Just that one, for example. If I open this one, this is a female, but it has like deeper pores, you know. It's a little bit rougher in here. And it's a beautiful young woman, you know. So you're going to find like all kinds of variations. But in this case, here she has like very nice little pores in here. Not a lot of those little arms reaching to the next to the neighbor, right? But it's almost like in between here, you see like you have the pore itself, And you see how you have like those tiny, almost like tiny pores in between the pores, right? So you have like those little dots right there. So it's almost like a miniature of her skin represented in between the pores. So that's an interesting feature in there. You notice that in some people. And then here, of course, like this is also very recurrent to have like all those blackheads, right? Most people have blackheads in their noses. Some of them are very visible, very black. In this case here, not so much. Recurrent, like I said, like the bumpiness around this area. So you have the wrinkles and everything, like again, like indicating the squinting here. But also you have like all those little bumps. And this is going to be very recurrent, and a lot of people are going to see those little bumps. And this is going to be recurrent as well, of the lines I mentioned before, super thin lines, right? Horizontal. And those lines here going that way. So basically, like those are going to be indications like for every single character, basically. If you're talking about someone a little younger, right? Again, like a younger person, you see like thin little lines around the lips, thin little lines around here. And that pattern that I mentioned, you know, it's like the lines going this way. So basically like they flare like horizontally here in the middle, and they flare out, kind of like following the, basically like almost like if it was a circle around the lips, right? It follows that structure. And then you get those other lines coming this other way, right? So you have a little pattern in there in the middle. And not a lot of pores visible in her case in here, because it seems like her skin in general doesn't have very deep pores. Just very nice ones in there, right? So now that we saw a couple of examples of male, female, and in different people, let's look at the old people, because I mentioned that in my case, like for my character, since he's an older dude, I'm gonna have to actually downplay all the pores that I sculpted already, which I had to sculpt to demonstrate to you guys. So I don't mind like just sculpting then eliminating later. But let's look at some of those guys. For example, we noticed that this guy, probably like in his 50s, right? Not quite 60. He still had the pores quite visible in there. And then you're gonna notice like a guy like this one, that's kind of like a transition, right? So this guy here, it's not gonna be a super old guy. Probably gonna be like in his 60s in here. But you're still gonna see a lot of the pores, right? So you're gonna see the pores right here in the nose. You still see them in here. But when you get to this area, you're gonna start seeing what's gonna happen in the next years in here, which is like that lift of the pores that I mentioned before, right? They're gonna go like from deep like this one, for example, starting to lift until they become almost just like texture, you know? They don't have like a little dot in the middle anymore that you can actually detect, right? They erase and they basically become something else. But other than that, like the patterns and the directions of the stretch and everything is going to be the same, because we are talking about humans with the same set of facial expressions, right? Unless you're Jim Carrey, and then you have a completely different anatomy for your face. But normal people have like a very similar structure for the direction of the wrinkles because of the facial expressions that we all share. So and then so that guy is kind of like you know, 60s, right? But let's look for someone older, like this lady here. I don't know her age, but you know, it's like 70s to 80s or something like that, maybe 80s, right? Looks like 80s. And then let's look at those pores in here, and let's see if we can find something we can detect. So you see like some faint versions of them. So like here, here, there, right? Very faint. But other than that, it's almost like it becomes just a texture. It's almost like if we sculpted that pore that we did the other day using those little arms, right? The little rays around them. And we just decided to actually raise the middle of it. So basically the whole would raise, and would keep the little rays, right? Like around them, still connecting to the next one, but without like the depth in the middle. So when you get to this area here, you're gonna see a lot of them are like wrinkles, right? Lots of wrinkles. And those pores are starting to connect with each other, but without showing any signal of being there, you know? They're kind of like, they kind of disappear. They become something else. And then this area here, you see how interesting this is when you're gonna start doing the texturing, right? You know, the fat deposit right there and right there. You can see like the translucent kind of yellowish stuff underneath, right? Not a lot of like the little pimples in here in this case, but you know, it depends if it goes from person to person, right? And this area, very kind of like film-like, right? I normally use this thing for older people. Like it's almost like a film. It becomes like very shiny and smooth in a way, you know, and those nasty little, um, you know, micro veins in there. But again, like sharing, right? Like you get the same direction. Actually, the angle here is not allowing me to see that much, but she probably has like all those little lines going that direction. And then when it comes here, is that that little brain texture that I mentioned, you know, those forms, they start like getting all together and becoming something else. They mix, you know, but you still see the direction in here, like, you know, so it comes from the corner, from the center of the eye, and it goes on the diagonal like that, right? Same thing. Those little lines here going vertically, but it's starting to become bigger and bigger forms, right? You're gonna see that probably in the chin as well. This is a very cool, interesting form right there. Look at that thing. It's a little web in there. She has kind of like I don't know if she had a surgery in there or something happened, but she definitely has some funky going on with her nose. And then when it gets here, I mean, like all those little lines that we had so well defined, like before for a younger person, you see like they start fading away, and then they basically become bigger forms as well, right? Still see a little bit of like little echoes of them underneath here, but they are all like bigger forms. Surprisingly, around this area here that we didn't see a lot of pores in other guys, you can actually see some pores in here. But then when you get here, they become bigger forms again, right? It's almost like one of those Egyptian cats, right? Like you have like this super wrinkly heads. So that's kind of like that kind of type of structure, right? But in terms of the direction of the wrinkles and everything, it's going that way, same way that's the everybody else, right? That we showed before. But interesting that she has like some very visible pores around this area, but not much around the other areas. And this super fuzzy peach fuzz in here, like in her nose, is very interesting as well, how long it got in certain areas. So, you know, just like a counter examples here to show the variations. And then let's look at the last one, just because we did like male and female, like younger. So let's do female. Let's see if we can find a old dude here. I don't think they have an old, super old dude. But in that case, if they don't have one, let's open this other old lady here. And let's see her skin. This one, she looks very, very much like the film quality that I tell you about, that the skin becomes, right? And obviously she's using makeup in here. So there's some makeup going on. I don't think she's all natural in here. You can see like little pieces of powder, right, around here. So she's like it's hard to see what's going on, but you know, it's like here you can see some of the skin detail. And as you can tell, I mean, like there's not a lot of pores going on in here. It's mostly like micro wrinkles and stretching. You know, it's like very thin skin, right? You see it right there, like those little lines, but no sign of pores. But then when you get around here, then you see the pores again. Those are going to be probably like the last ones to fade. Probably the nose. Her nose, like, surprise. She has a lot of powder though. She has a lot of makeup. This is maybe not the best example here, but again, you know, it's like those micro lines. Still see some of them in here. There's a lot of makeup, hard to tell, but they become like bigger lines. You know, they become like bigger forms. Here they actually see like how they're breaking up, like in kind of like random directions, right? And then that little brain texture, right? And then a lot of accumulated makeup right there in the bigger wrinkles. So let's see. So that's the last example. And then let's jump into our character. And now I'm going to have to look at some references for my guy, right? So this guy here. So all of that stuff that I just showed you guys, you're going to see, like, for example, like that in his case here, for his age, it's not going to make that much sense to have like all those super well-defined pores, right? In your case, because a lot of you guys are modeling like younger people, then it makes all the sense in the world. And I've seen like some results today that you guys did, like large areas already sculpted with the pores, and I was really impressed, because that's basically what I'm expecting at this point, you know, to see a lot of the detail in there. But what's missing, both in my model and your models, it's obviously the wrinkles and everything, but also variation in the skin, right? So let's explore some of that. with our model here. So let's get the unhide this. Let's get all the parts that I need. And then just ignore the rest. So let's keep just a mask like that. I can even do this as I don't want to see anything else. So just a mask. And then let's enter HD. Go to the highest resolution, press A. About 26 million polygons. Let's do some sculpting here. That's what I have. See, like I went ahead and I sculpted, basically like I covered the entire face, at least the lower part here with pores. Didn't do anything about the nose. And because I wanted to speed things up, I basically like I cheated, right? Don't tell anyone out there. That I remember, like when I show you guys when I sculpted a plane with a bunch of pores and I made like an array, right? So that's basically this one. Let's see, generic pores, multi-pores, this one here. So I have this brush here, right? That I can actually just sculpt a lot of stuff at the same time like that, right? And then what I do, I normally like, if I sculpt it at that proportion, right, this size. So I actually make my cursor, you know, the size of the draw size, about the same size of it. So I can actually know how far I can get from it or how close. And then when I draw the next one, I can just like barely touch it like that and have a similar proportion. And then I just like fill it in what's missing, you know, those areas that are missing, basically like in the betweens. So that's basically how I did faster that stuff. So you can do that too, you know, sculpt a couple of those pores if you want to speed up things. I would normally do this just like in other areas and not so much in the mask itself. But again, this guy here is going to be just, you know, it's like a lot of this stuff is going to be eliminated anyway. I'm going to be preserving mostly this area here. So let's talk about the variations in the skin, because right now you see it's a very, very, it's almost like mechanical thing, right? Like, or like a artificial kind of leather kind of surface, because we don't have any variation going on. So let's talk about the variations. When I do the, you know, it's like I sculpt stuff, I try to add some variation by hand, and some of them by using like some spray brushes here in ZBrush. So I have a bunch of them. For example, like I have this skin pores random in here, which basically what it does, I'm gonna experiment right here. Let's see if it does anything here. You see, like, it just adds this little dots, right? And obviously this one here, it's not gonna respect what's already sculpted in there, right? It's gonna actually destroy a little bit of what's sculpted, because this one is based in the standard brush. It's not based on the elastic brush, because the elastic is the one that actually preserves the detail, right? But it's still very useful if you want to sculpt in the lower levels, right? So let's see how I build this one. So this is basically like a standard brush. And then for the alpha, I'm using the alpha I use most of the time, which is 39, right? Alpha 39. Let's see if I have any tweaks in here. So I'm using a little bit of a tweaked curvature. So that's basically, I got to a point a little bit. I'm using a radial fade that's quite big, like a 20. And that's about it for the alpha itself. And then for the spray here, I'm actually using the spray, not the color spray. It kind of doesn't matter here because we're just sculpting. And then my settings are placement default 0.5 and then scale at 1. Color doesn't need it, but it doesn't matter here because we're not sculpting color. And then the flow at 0.25, which is basically like the default settings, right? And then, like I said, if I go, for example, like to a lower level here, for example, like 3 subdivision levels less, like that, and now I sculpt it, I can get a little bit more variation in the skin, right? It's too much here. It's almost like, looks like acne, right? But if I go, let's say like a little bit less intensity, and I just like do a little bit of that in here, I can start getting a little bit more of a random structure, random surface, right? Let's crank a little bit more. So let's try 13. So I'm sculpting symmetry here, obviously, but you know, you don't need to at this point. If you have the entire surface covered, you can actually add more variation by breaking the symmetry at this point. I would say, like, if you have the area covered with the basic pores, at any time you feel like it, you can actually break the symmetry and then just go and do things manually from this point on both sides, you know, especially when you start doing the wrinkles. But so I'm just adding some variation with this brush, so nothing too crazy. So I'm just going down, right? So if I press Alt now, you get this type of effect. So you get like some bumpiness, right? So that's basically what's gonna do. So I'm gonna do that a little bit in the skin as well. I'm gonna try to be kind of like easy. So Alt, and then just a few in different areas, not all over the place. So just like pick a couple of areas for that. Just add some variation to it. And let's turn off the symmetry and do some right here in the middle, and then play with the scale. It's always good, like if you're sculpting with the spray brushes, either for sculpting or for painting stuff, that you always vary both the intensity and the scale of it. So it's good to just like, you know, don't go too constant with those parameters. You know, it's like just like add some variation to it. I'm gonna add some of those bumps around here, the nose as well. Maybe like that's too much. So let's get the intensity a little lower, 7. Just get some bumpiness in there. But the nose in this area, I want to get it very shiny, so I cannot go too crazy with the breakups. And then I'm gonna reverse it and just add some of those pores in there, just with this random brush. Just so it breaks up a little bit the surface. And I'm working asymmetrically here, just so I can get a little bit more different stuff on the sides. It's like very, very quick detail, like very, very subtle, right? And then now let's go back to the highest level. And let's pick some of those pores, right? So now I have a little bit more of like a, you know, surface variation in there. So let's pick some of those pores and turn them into something a little deeper. Let's see if I have that one that I did from the other day. It was, no, I actually reset my zebra. So let's make it again. So I'm gonna go to my elastic brush. First thing, I'm gonna clone it. So I'm gonna clone that brush. And we're gonna make a little brush here that's gonna be our pore using elastic. So I'm gonna switch to drag rectangle. Gonna pick alpha number 35, something like that. And then under alpha, I'm gonna just tweak this curvature a little bit more like that. And let's see, turn off RGB. Let's see what we get pressing Alt. This is a pretty deep one right there, right? Let's see, let's calibrate our intensity here to, let's say 20. That's too faint now. So let's get a little deeper. Let's try to find a sweet spot. Maybe like 38. That's better. So at 38, I got that little effect in there. And that's basically an elastic brush, right? So if it's elastic brush, I don't need to worry about things just getting, things just destroying my detail. So I switched to 42 a little bit, the intensity. And I'm just gonna go here and I'm gonna pick some of those guys randomly. Let's see, my symmetry is off. I believe it is. Yeah. So randomly, I'm just gonna pick some of those pores and I'm gonna just increase the depth of them to add some extra variation as well. I'm gonna pick some one here, there. Try to avoid like making too much like of a line, right? Just to add some variation to that. Pick the wrong spot in there. So basically like I'm going right in the middle of those little pores and just like dragging a little bigger little hole in there. So some of them closer to each other, so it's not like always like constant distance between each other. Sometimes a little closer, sometimes more distant. And then now with this technique here, you can actually go around the entire face and then pick some of them just to add some of that variation. I'm gonna just do a part of it in here and move on because other than that, it's just gonna be a repetition anyway. So I don't need to exhaust that. I'm gonna save this brush for the next time because I'm terrible at saving stuff. If you're saving your brushes, you can always go to your C drive and then save it at your startup. So so next time we actually have ZBrush in your list in there, or you can save like in a different spot and then just bring it through the lights. How do you call it? The light spotlight. Actually, lightbox, right? Through lightbox. So let's see, save as, and let's go to my C drive, program files, and then Pixologic. Pixologic, where is it? Right here, Pixologic. And then under 2019, which is the software, the version we are using right now, I'm gonna go to Z Startup, and then brushes, brush presets. And then here I can save it. So I'm gonna just do like a pimple elastic, something like that. Let's see. Pore, oops, pore depth elastic 1. So next time it's there, right? And then we're gonna modify the same one to create some pimples in here. So basically, like if I sculpt it right now, you're gonna get this type of result, right? Just like sculpting the pimple. So it's too sharp at the point because we have that curve that was modified like that, right? So let's just clone it again. So clone it so we can start the fresh one. And then I'm gonna tweak my alpha to something a little bit more of a little rounder at the top, right? Something like that. I can even add a little curvature like that. And then let's see how we get, what do we get here? So yeah, something like that, a little bump like that, right? Just, you know, like nothing super well defined, but just something for us to play with, especially around this area of, you know, like I said before, around here, right? So you can actually add some of those little dots with different scales, right? And then obviously when you merge all this stuff here with the wrinkles that we are going to be sculpting soon, then things are going to start making sense. And then the same way you can actually pick some areas here. It can have like, they can read like mosquito bites or micro, you know, pimples or whatever the skin has in there. But just like add some of those in different areas, right? For the nose, I'm going to try to avoid using too many of them because I'd rather use the little one I showed you guys last time. That was the pimple brush that I created. And I show you the settings, but I can repeat it so you can actually see it. So little things like that, you know, so I can help the skin to read a little bit less mechanical, right? And then obviously you can go like bigger like that if you want to add like a bigger form. But obviously if my character has something in a certain position, I want to make sure that I match that one, right? Like if it's a very specific kind of mole or something like that. So in this case here, again, I'm going to just do the side in here. And then I'm going to move on and then go to the next kind of like type of variation we can add. So let's see this one as well. So brush, save as, and then I have my, let's see. So intro, what was that? Pore depth elastic. So I'm going to just do like a pimple elastic, something like that. I can pimple elastic. And then now let's play with that other brush, the one that's kind of like the generic one I mentioned the other day, which was this skin random, skin random, this one here, which is based on that alpha, right, that I mentioned before, 58. And then the thing that I'm changing is just a little bit, making a little bit sharper in here. So instead of like a straight line, it's just a little bit of you know, contrast in the map, in the map. And then for the settings here for the stroke, I'm using the spray, and again it's the same settings as the other one before. So placement at 0.5, scale at 1, color doesn't matter, and then flow at 0.25. So basically all default, right? So this one is that one that I mentioned that if you use, if you sculpt in circles like that, you get this nice leathery kind of detail, right? And obviously, like the scale is going to be important, and it's going to be important as well if you don't repeat, if you don't go over the same region multiple times. If you do something that's more spread out like that, that can actually help a lot to break up some of the structures here. And there are two ways to use it, like either in circles like that to create this effect of texturing, right? Or the one to add direction that I mentioned before, that's actually just like go in a single direction like that, right? And you get this nice little stretching kind of surface. So it's very useful for areas like this one, for example, like let's say like the nasal labia in here. If I want to create something that, you know, basically like there's a direction that starts around here, and it goes up and then goes around. So I'm basically like going directionally, right? And again, I can just like switch to a bigger brush, and then I can force it to have like bigger wrinkles breaking up stuff like that. So you see, like at this point, they are not like following and uh, uh, actually doing the what I mentioned before. They're actually connecting the dots. But the connect the dots thing we're gonna do like very specifically when we get into the major wrinkles in there. Those ones are just like minor wrinkles, right? You're just like trying to help to add some direction. So I add some of that for this area, and I also add some of those normally around here, going like again like in the direction of the face, right? The contour of the face. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna keep like bringing some direction in here, like kind of going over as well. And then if I need to raise some of those bumps later, I can do it. But I normally just add the detail and see how much I can get. And then if I need any adjustment, I just go to a lower level and just like smooth things out a little bit. So I'm gonna be bringing this one going towards the exit here, but the outer area. So instead of like going straight like that, I'm just gonna go towards this way, right? It's kind of following this form and then flaring towards the chin in here. Around here, then you're gonna start, if you remember what we saw in the reference in there, then you see like I missed a point in there. I'm gonna go a little bit more of like a vertical line, right? So I'm gonna go more vertically in here with those lines. And then as I go towards the sides in here, I'm gonna start like going more and changing direction more and more, right? Something like that. So you start getting a little bit of that feel of a little bit of a film, right? Like because it's a very, very, very thin skin that's happening there. But obviously, because his skin is like of an older person, a lot of this stuff I'm gonna have to actually eliminate later. But what I'm showing you here is actually something to help you guys because you're sculpting people of different ages. So the principle is the same. It's just like the depth of the wrinkles and the pores that's gonna change, you know. But just by adding that, you start like breaking that impression that you know, it's like things are too mechanical, right? Like all those pores are too mechanical. Same I'm gonna do here because I know the direction is gonna be always perpendicular to the direction of the fibers of the muscles, right? You're gonna get that little smoker mouth. So I'm gonna bring some of them towards the middle in here, like that. See, it's a very, very faint effect, right? It's not like something that's totally obvious at first. It really helps to break up the forms in between the pores. But you see, like my intensity is at 12. It's not like a super huge effect. But then when you start actually sculpting the actual wrinkles, then you're gonna see those things actually forming. Same I'm gonna do here. And here is gonna be that area that I mentioned before, that we're gonna have like this blending area, right? We reach this area here with the pores. If you look at those references, you're gonna notice that sometimes they end around here, the eye bag, and sometimes even a little lower than that. So they start becoming a little bit shallower and then mixing with the wrinkles themselves. So let's do this. Before you go to the eye bag, which is where I'm planning to spend the rest of the lesson today, I'm gonna just go to the standard brush. And again, like this one I have saved, but every time I just recreate it just to show. So it's alpha 39. And then if you tweak this one to a point like that, right? Not too crazy, but around here. And then stroke at 0. By default is 0.25. I'm gonna put 0.02, so about 1/10 of that. And now I have this very sharp little line I can use, right? So I'm gonna do that with intensity slower, a little bit lower than that, so maybe like 12. And I'm gonna cut some of those lines. If you don't wanna go too crazy, for example, like if you don't wanna have at the 26 million polygons like I have here, the super high res version, you can go one subdivision level less, and then the interaction should be faster and without compromising too much, you know, because unless I'm sculpting the super thin wrinkles, with this ones here should be just fine at that resolution. So I'm gonna start adding some character in here. So I'm gonna get some of those guys. Like I said before, I'm gonna play the game of connect the dots, right? So just gonna get some of them like that. And I'm gonna go to the next neighbor and just like start connecting things like that. I'm gonna pick one area, for example, around here, which I already have the direction defined by the micro wrinkles I added before. And I'm just gonna accentuate. So I'm gonna get some of those wrinkles. I'm gonna start cutting across, but paying attention to what's the next one. And try to avoid, for example, like a straight line too long. So you can actually break up, like get those guys here going to the next neighbor to the side, but without being the immediate neighbor. So kind of like going and crossing in different directions like that. So adding little details like that gonna help you to actually break up this illusion that everything it's too perfect. The more randomness you add, the better. So when I get around here, I'm gonna do the same for this entire area, and then I'm gonna have to actually start going up as well. So I'm gonna go, some of those wrinkles gonna go up around here. Again, like to know the direction of the wrinkles, always refer to that website and then get some ideas from there, use your imagination as well. Think about how the expressions are being formed, if you're sculpting with the facial expression, and have fun with the process, because this is like, it looks like something that's very boring for someone who never did it. But once you get to do this stuff, it's almost like it becomes pre-addictive in a way, because you're being creative, it's like you actually, all those decisions I'm making here, like what little dots to connect and things like that, it's all, it's like I'm not following a script. I'm actually just like going with it. And that's the part that I have fun, in those classes, is just imagining things. And so I'm gonna connect some of those here towards the mouth now. So I'm gonna create those little longer lines. And again, if I'm going with a line that's starting here all the way here, maybe instead of like going all the way down, I can just pick the neighbor and then try to complete that line with a parallel line, right? Something like that. So instead of like going like da 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 da, like straight line like that, right? You're actually picking a few of them in a line, and then picking a secondary line that starts from another pore, and then breaking up again to another one. So changing direction is important and also create this effect. So let's go with that. Break up here, maybe like pick another row, go around there, and then here to here. Then here I can start invading a little bit of the lips, right? Because everything, it has to have transition, right? Things just don't stop all of a sudden and then become something else. They actually make a nice transition from one form to another one. So I'm gonna just like invade this thing, and then obviously you're gonna get some other directions coming from there, and then change the direction, But for now, we're just gonna start like very timid with it, and then until we go crazy with this stuff, after we are feeling a little bit more comfortable with it. So around the middle here, let's get those guys going. And trying to add like some naturalistic, forms. And then also there's another set of little lines that happen here, because the compression here of the base of the nose, right? You're gonna get sometimes those wrinkles that goes this way here. So you're gonna get like some horizontal ones here, especially like if there's a smile baked in the expression. So you're gonna get some of those little wrinkles going this way. And you see, like I'm always trying to find, it's like little pores I can actually connect to. And if the line is too long, I just break up to the next, to the neighbor ones, right? And I keep doing that over and over again. So you can pick, like, of course, I'm sculpting everything at the same level here. And yesterday we were talking about the hierarchy in the fine detail, right? And it works exactly the same way as the hierarchy in the higher levels, in the lower levels, right? So that means that if I'm breaking things up and they all look at this base like the same level, right? Like it's the same depth all the way across. That means that it's time for me to just pick one of them and make them kind of like the hero here, right? So I'm gonna pick this guy here in the middle, and I'm gonna exaggerate a little bit more. So that's gonna be like the hero little wrinkle in here that defines, it's gonna be the most visible one, right? When we actually see the renders. And then the same we're gonna do for the eye bags. We're gonna pick a few of those that gonna be the hero ones. So we're gonna just like bring this one from the top and down. Trying to imagine those guys going down like that. And then again, going back here, adding some more vertical ones and breaking things up, not to make like super long lines, right? Always pick some other neighbor in there. All those little things, it's like when you start doing the renders, it's gonna actually add up, it's like to the entire final result. And same here around the corner of the mouth. I'm not even looking at reference at this point. I'm just establishing some of the most common stuff, and then obviously they're gonna try to look at the reference and try to match some of them. But like I said, I idealize a lot of my stuff. It's like a lot of stuff is very believable seen from the close-ups. But if you compare it, the actual thing, it's not as precise. It's like because I keep a lot of my own style in it, and that's why I was trying to emphasize yesterday. And I was like that my class is much. There's a lot of techniques, right? It's very technical in a way, but it's not like the techniques are above the artistry. It's like I try to focus more on the artistry, and then the techniques are just like whatever is needed to make the art happen. But it's not like I'm gonna go super anal about it's like matching things scientifically at all. I'm gonna just reserve a ton of space for myself to just like create things. To me, that's more interesting than actually trying to match anything. Like I mentioned before, when we work this stuff like professionally, right? And I worked with this for many years, doing like digital doubles, all kinds of stuff, creature work, and for the movies. And basically, like we do this stuff, everything has to be kind of like following certain formulas. You use scans for everything. You use like texturing XYZ for the textures. A lot of times, sometimes it's like Mari projected stuff, like a lot of light stage work, and so you use everything you can to produce the work. But there's no creative input, right? It's just a very automatic kind of thing. You just try to do the best you can to match the real thing, because that's the objective in there. But my objective here in this class is not to match anything real. It's to rather recreate something. It's actually paint an impression of a human being. You're trying to paint an impression of a human being that if you do correctly and you follow some of the stuff I'm teaching you guys in this class, you might be able to render those digital humans in super close-ups and still believe that's something that's in there, So that's the whole objective of the class. It's not really, it's like and it's also not a class about like detail anatomy sculpting of the face, for example, right? Like I never mentioned that. It's basically a class about for experienced artists. So basically, like that's why it's like you have to have knowledge, and it's an advanced class, right? So you have to have a good knowledge in ZBrush and Maya. So I expect you guys to have a very good notion of modeling. It's like, and that includes it's like the primary, secondary forms, all this stuff. Maybe we're going to be more specific next time for the next class, because I don't have it's like the time to actually include everything in this class, right? We already spent like 32 hours going to be total, and you're going to see it's going to be tight because we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff on the way. But I'm talking here and sculpting at the same time, so it's kind of and then but I mean, like we're not going to have the time to explore everything at the T, but everything that I produce in terms of the final result when it comes to the sculpting of the fine detail and the shaders and the lighting and little tricks for comp at the end, all this stuff is going to be explored. We are mostly like focusing on the final result here, and the ways to get there more than it's like sculpting techniques, right? Maybe in the future we're going to be doing another class about like sculpting techniques, but I'm not very confident about like teaching sculpting techniques and anatomy techniques, but fine detail like this, I always enjoy doing it. I was like, and I'm pretty confident about that stuff. So I rather focus on that than, try to take a big bite of something that I'm not completely comfortable. So let's just keep going here. So you're gonna see like the nasolabial, folding here. I'm not gonna do like what a lot of people do. That's basically like get a line like this and just keep going straight, right? Let's try to break up that line. So we're gonna connect some dots in here. Let's get the little neighbors, and then start like breaking them into You can get with a line that's a little long, but then you kind of get to a point and then you pick the neighbor. And then you go with another line and another line, you break them up. And at the end, you're gonna have like lines going a little bit more invading that and crossing over it. So I'm gonna add some of those crossing over. And all that stuff can help to actually, create a little bit of a more organic result. So I'm gonna come with them a little bit more towards the middle in here and then towards the nose. And I can even switch to my higher resolution so we can actually, let's do subdivision level. And basically like those brushes I show you guys, this one here to create the micro direction, and then this other one here, all this stuff is gonna be exactly what I'm gonna be using to sculpt a lot of stuff around the face. And then I try to actually show all the techniques. And then when you guys are not looking, when I'm actually after the class and stuff like that, or over the weekend, I try to stick with the same techniques, but it's just like a repetition of that. And of course, like paying attention to direction and, looking at references if I need, but nothing like hidden from you guys, it's like, I really don't want to do that. And even for the previous class, what happened like over the weekend, sometimes I would go crazy and just add something else, like slap some color or something. But the next day or on Monday, I would just go over it and just say like, okay, so this is exactly what I did differently. And here are all the details and all the settings. So I would open everything up because that's the whole objective, it's like keep everything pretty open to you guys. Money doesn't come easy, you guys are paying, although like the price is really fair. I think some people might think is even cheap for the amount of information, but I want to make sure that you guys are, taking, it's like making it worth it, right? So basically, like, give a lot of information so you guys, I feel good about it, and I don't feel like we're taking advantage of anyone, right? I heard that the best type of business is when both sides think that they are taking a little bit of advantage of each other, That's the best type of business, and I think it's true, I want you guys to feel like at the end of the class, like, oh man, that was not expensive, and I want to think like, it's like, well, same deal. So, okay, so now that we explore a little bit of that, you see I don't have a lot of mid-resolution stuff, right? Basically, like I just added a few, like a very little details in here. So let me look at some of my references now, because I'm just not looking at anything at this point. And I'm gonna try to get some of the detail for the eyes so we can actually explore together. Let's see if I can find one here that has good lighting. They're all kind of like crappy when it comes to lighting, and especially the resolution is pretty bad. This one looks good, actually, not too bad. It just has some, not that great either. It's like very, very soft. Let's see if I can get another one. This one looks better. Yeah, I think I can use this one here. So we're gonna try to build some of those forms in there, like the bigger forms. So I'm gonna just move this one to the side. And I'm gonna start sculpting the eye bags and try to incorporate some of the mid-resolution detail, right? So I can either go to subdivision levels below this one, right? So go outside of HD, or I can just go to the lowest in here, which should give me, a fairly good amount of polygons anyway. And then I'm just gonna start blocking some of those forms. Let's try the same brush, intensity 10. And then I can do this. Let's do like to build up some of those bigger forms. I'm gonna start very faint in here just to define the position of them. So I'm gonna get another one around here. And then there's another one that crosses pretty good. This is kind of like a major one. They're gonna cross around here. And then this one here that's built around this area, it actually is supposed to be much lower than this. So I'm gonna build up this one to go across here. And then it's gonna fold up. And then this guy here is gonna be actually lower. So I'm gonna just start it right here, crossing this area. And this one I'm gonna erase. And let's see what else we can get here. So let's build some of those volumes for the eyes. It's going to start breaking this one up like that. There's a little line that's going to start forming around here. And I'm like in the very low resolution, right? 400K in there. So I'm just going to block those things. I started getting a little bit stronger with my pressure here. And then those lines basically like it's going to be across the board for any age. They're always going to go that direction. Just going to mark the positioning. I'm just smaller in the middle here. Try to avoid like too parallel, right? So I can break the direction slightly to prevent being too parallel to each other. So here, let's get another one around here that I can see there. And then from here, let's get one starting from there, and then breaking through this. Another one here, there, and here. And then this is going to break up to a different direction. So we start going towards this, and then I can just like pretend I'm going to go that way, and I just go this way. Make a little Y in there, just a little detail. I'm going to break this one here. So those lines, basically, the way that they're going to work, they're going to start breaking up in this direction here. If I just mark it, it's going to be like this, right? They're going to go always this way. And when you get here, they're going to start going towards the lines of the forehead. So they're going to start doing that kind of direction, right? And then here, it's like those ones going to do this, right? Those ones going to do this. I'm going to go around like that, right? Basically like following that, this wrinkle here, they're going to go that direction, right? Going to go around here. Those ones going to go around there. That's basically like the directions you find, you know, it's like if you're looking at references. So just like, this is just like to give a clue of it. But that's basically what I'm going to be following when I'm sculpting this stuff. I'm going to just do that and do, okay. Let's go back here. So now we established some of those bigger like wrinkles, right? But we don't have any form in there. They're not like built up or anything like that. So we are at the 10:31. If you guys want to ask any questions, you're free to do it. Let's try to stick with the questions related to the current class. So actually we don't go too far, so we can keep the focus. And then obviously like I'm here to answer to any questions, but I rather like focus on the task at hand. So feel free to ask questions. We're going to find those ones and go around here. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to start building up those forms, like I said. So I'm going to use the clay buildup. And the clay buildup, I'm going to switch from the square alpha. I'm going to switch to this 35 it can be. And then the intensity, I always use something very faint, like 2 or 3 for intensity. I'm going to use 2 in here. And then I'm going to build in between those little forms that I just added. So like this guy here, this guy. And obviously looking at the reference, right, to see how far you can go with the depth, because you don't want to go like super puffy. Actually, get this one. We get intensity for the smooth, I'm going to keep very low, and intensity for the brush at around 2.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
How are you, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Alfonso has one question regarding
the
depth of the intent. How do I control the depth intensity of the pores if we can't use layers? Because, like you said, that different age have different depth.
Yeah, I mean, like what happens is that because we don't have layers, we have to be creative with that, right? So if I'm trying to raise those pores, like I'm gonna do it for this guy here, I'm gonna have to be like very careful about the way that I'm raising them. I probably would go to a resolution like let's say if I'm at the lowest resolution of the sub-D here, I'm gonna go maybe like one subdivision more like that, just to see a little bit more of the wrinkles, and I would start smoothing things out here. And then if you smooth things out here, if you go higher and higher, you're going to start seeing like they're like more raised, right? But then at the end, you might be able to actually do a little bit extra smoothing. Let me just show you this. So it's gonna have to be a combination, right? Like if you're talking about the age, because I already have all this built in, like kind of cross kind of hatching in there. So if it's an old guy like this one, it's gonna be a combination of this. I'm gonna go maybe like 2 subdivision levels less. So I'm gonna just do a little smoothing here with a low intensity, maybe like 10 or something like that. So I'm gonna smooth this area slightly, not by much. And it's gonna create some kind of like reverse effect when you go higher. So it's not gonna look that good. But we can actually smooth it once again. So let's go higher here. Let's see what we get. So the pores are a little bit more raised now. I can actually do a little bit more smoothing. And when you do a little bit more smoothing here, if you sculpted your pore correctly, you're gonna see just those little dots in between, right? The little lines kind of gonna fade away. That's basically the type of detail you get when you're getting from a scan or from a light stage. A lot of times you get something like that. So, and then I go now to the highest resolution, and you're still gonna be able to see some of the detail in there. Let's see. So you see like those good little guys. So now I'm gonna be able to actually do a little bit more smoothing. And obviously, if you're talking about like an older person, right, then a lot of this stuff here is going to start fading away. So I'm going to be basically like using some directional stuff to actually fade them away, right, with directionality. Now, if you want to make them deeper, there is I believe there's a brush that actually increases the, the depth of things that you can actually use. But I don't remember. Actually, when I do this stuff, I normally do by hand, like by doing a similar technique like this one. And when I want to do something a little bit deeper, I actually go like it and make them like deeper by hand. But I remember there's a kind of like a brush that amplifies the effect. And I have to look at that actually, because that would be useful for you guys. If you remember it, then, let me know.
Okay, thank you, bud.
Yeah. So now that I messed up that area, let me just go back here and just undo a few times and go back to that. Okay, 26. Yeah. Hey, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Can I lower the intensity of the displacement map in Maya to smooth the details, or it is wrong?
Huh, that's a good point. I mean, what's going to happen if you do that? You might end up with some seams, You mean like reducing the resolution of it?
Yeah, the intensity of the displacement map.
Yeah, for example, like, yeah, if you reduce the resolution, I mean, like, unless you have a good buffer, when you export your maps, if you have something like, for example, the default is 4 pixels, right? But depending on how low you're going to go with it, maybe when you export the maps, you can get like a bigger buffer around the UVs. That might help. But yeah, I mean, like, if you have those ones locked in there, it should be okay-ish. But I wouldn't trust that much. It's like if you're exporting from the multi-map exporter, I would totally trust the original maps. But if you do any changes on them, you might end up like with some seams.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, that happened to me in the past. Actually, I was working a creature and I went like from 8K to 4K to save, and instead of like exporting from ZBrush, I actually just did like a reduction, I think, like Photoshop. And then it definitely ended up like some very, very little seams, but you definitely could see it. That's even worse when you use like 16-bit maps, right? 32 is more likely that you're gonna preserve a lot of stuff, but I'm still in the process of trying to erase the stuff I did. But anyway, I'm gonna redo this area here, so I'm not gonna spend too much time erasing anything. Let me just go back to the eyes here, and we're just gonna establish some secondary forms of this micro detail, right? So I'm gonna go back here in the resolution a few times. Let's go to 400,000, and then go back to this. I'm just gonna sculpt again with a very faint, a very small intensity, right? Like a 2. And then I'm gonna establish some of those secondary forms of our super fine stuff. It's almost like a secondary kind of a hierarchy inside of the main hierarchy, right? Just like to create the fine detail. There's another wrinkle that I noticed in here that he has actually breaks up in a funny way. Kind of like it breaks up from here, and then around here it kind of breaks this way. It has a little dimple in there. Just erase that. So now from distance, you start getting a little bit more of like an older kind of eye, right? So this one still looks pretty much younger. And this one here, now we started to establish those lines. So we're gonna build up this whole area here. This little guy here is important. So I'm gonna just do this. And another thing that I do sometimes when I want to get like a very organic feel, especially for older people eyes like that, I use a little bit of the inflate brush, but the inflate brush is a funny one because you have to be very careful the way it works. So for example, like if I want to inflate this area here to make it more organic, the first thing you're gonna have to see, it's how it looks like behind the curtain, right? So if you go to the back of it, what you're gonna get. So for example, like by default, the inflate brush is at 10, right? So if I do like, if I inflate this area at 10, right? I'm exaggerating here, obviously, but oh yeah, it looks great in here. Then you go in the back of the model, it's like, uh-oh. This kind of stuff here is gonna generate like some artifacts in your displacement because you get like some intersection going on, right? So either you can smooth from the inside like that and just get like just enough to get the crease in there, but without having the intersection. Or you can be much more careful when you inflate it, right? So I smooth it out, now it kind of works, but not perfect. So what I do with the inflate brush, instead of like using like a super intense version of it, I go and I put like intensity of between 1 and 2. So let's do 2. And very carefully inflate those things without going too crazy with it, right? Just enough to create that crease, but without generating any intersection underneath, right? This one actually has some intersection from the model itself that I'm gonna have to fix later. But yeah, I'm gonna deal with this later because that's the problem with the eyelid being that covered, right? So I'm gonna have to deal with that. But let's go back to our secondary forms here. So another thing I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna try to imagine like how these forms are colliding with each other, like I always mentioned, right? So basically, like if I'm sculpting something that's very soft, like the eye bag right here. So I'm gonna put the form in here and I'm gonna imagine, oh man, I hate this pop menu that pops the wrong spot when you're too low in the screen. You probably have that problem too. So I'm gonna build this one up around here, but then I'm gonna imagine that this area here is gonna have to be pressing it as well. Again, like the menu pops right in front of the wrong spot. Okay. It's a love and hate relationship with ZBrush. So I'm gonna build this one up. So I'm gonna make sure that it reads as something soft. And then when I get a little bit lower in here, the skin is gonna get even thinner. So I'm gonna build like a little layer right here. And then obviously I'm gonna have to add some wrinkles to break up this entire surface later. Let's see how we're doing with the time. Well, that's good. We're gonna be able to do plenty of wrinkles here with the time we have. So I'm just gonna build up those ones. And the clay buildup is really good for this kind of stuff, you know, especially with the round. Actually, I'm sculpting with the inflate, thinking I'm using the clay buildup. But it's fine because I didn't mess up too much the surface. Let's go back in here. Let's build up this. I didn't inflate too much to the point that destroyed the surface in the back. The clay buildup is great for just like, you know, creating this collision. The inflate does the same thing, but the inflate actually goes over the board and then the clay buildup actually stops before it messes up the surface too much. So I'm gonna do like those smaller forms, just like to establish like, okay, thinking about the thickness of all the surface I'm sculpting, right? So if I'm sculpting like the skin itself, I was thinking about how thin the skin was, so creating like some micro wrinkles and everything. But here I'm trying to imagine like, okay, so the secondary forms in here, so how thick they are, right? And it's important to actually to capture that thickness first before you actually break up the surface further. So it's that respect of the primary, secondary forms and tertiary that I mentioned yesterday that it goes across the board, you know, it's like from the top levels, or actually the lower levels, right? Like from the structure of your model, all the way to this type of form. It's almost like this becomes another creature itself, right? So you're actually practicing the same stuff you did for sculpting the base forms for the face. You're gonna use the same principles right here, right? You're gonna establish your secondary forms within this little scope in here. And then this another very useful thing for the clay buildup is when you have like a dent like that. For example, like I have an area like this one that's deep, and you want to create bridges, right? So you want to go across this area here with a bridge. So basically, like if you build up like that, it's very good for filling up those areas, you know, and creating those little bridges like that. So he adds this little impression that there's a little bit of a stretch of the skin, right? So we can do that kind of stuff with this brush very easily as well. And now let's say I'm not finished at all with this, right? But we need to move on because, like I said, the technique I'm showing you here it's already there. So I can actually tell you guys that what I'm going to be doing tonight is more of the same for this. So let's move to some juicy detail at the highest levels, right? So now I have some established forms in there for the eye. Not perfect, but enough for me to demonstrate something before I go back to this stage. And what I do, I said before many times that I don't respect, you know, it's like a hierarchy of you know, it's like order of things. I actually respect the hierarchy of the form itself, right? Like the primary, secondary, tertiary, but mixing them, like I mentioned, for example, like I sculpt primary and secondary is almost at the same time, and secondary and tertiary almost at the same time as well. But for example, like when I get to something in terms of like how linear the work is, I break this laws that I established to myself many times. For example, like if I'm sculpting the pores first, so I can actually connect the dots later. Sometimes I do the opposite. For example, if I'm sculpting the wrinkles around here, the bridge of the nose, I sculpt the wrinkles first sometimes, and then I come with the pores and I place them roughly on top of the wrinkles I sculpted just to create the same impression. You know, it's like that was something I was actually connecting the dots. So I did the opposite thing. So I do, it's like Cartman, right? Like whatever I do what I want, right? But it's true. I mean, like I keep going back and forth to all those areas. So I'm going to be sculpting like the fine detail in here now. But then at some point, I'm going to go back to this resolution here, the lowest, and I'm going to tweak the secondary forms again, you know, and I might be going back all the way to the non-HD model and tweak my primary forms in there at any time. And that happens like many times every night. And then I end up like exporting like multiple displacement maps passes every night because of that, you know, because I want to see progress in my model. I don't want to, like in the studio, you know, it's like you send your model out to someone and then and you have to wait like days or weeks sometimes until you see some result. No, I want to see results straight away. That's why we are all our own TDs and riggers and anything we need to be here, which is great. So let's go back to the highest level.
But Chris,
yes.
Once you go back to these primary or secondary forms, nothing of this work from the Geometry HD is lost at all?
No, not at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you do any changes, for example, right here at the highest level, using, for example, a standard brush or something like that, like a big standard brush, then you're going to erase a lot of it. But if you're working at the lowest levels, everything rides on top of it. So it's totally safe to do it.
Okay.
Yep. It's good stuff, man. So let's go back here and now let's establish some of those minor, the smaller wrinkles, right? Not the smallest ones. Let's do like a little bit more of the medium ones. So let's say at 6 million polygons, so what's subdivision level less than the highest? And let's establish some of those guys here. So I'm gonna go with this guy, and I'm gonna start breaking up. So I'm gonna make a little smooth like that and straight, and then break up slightly. And then from here, sometimes what happens, or most of the time, is that those wrinkles, they start coming down this area. So I'm gonna be smoothing out a little bit of those pores in here because I'm gonna start merging them with the wrinkles. So I'm gonna do a little smoothing. Even further, you know, it's like I don't want them to get too close to the eye bag because it's gonna look a little artificial. Just gonna smooth them a little further up, down here. I think that should be enough. And then I'm gonna reestablish this one, this line. I'm gonna break up right here. Just like little details like that, you know, it's like you help a lot with how organic things look. So I'm gonna be cutting this back here, and then gonna go back here, and then start digging this a little deeper. Another thing that I do sometimes, for example, like if I'm defining those lines here, right? So I'm just like defining those wrinkles going this direction, and you can see that they're very shallow, right? Like they don't have enough volume, right? They're just like very shallow in there. But I'm just establishing like the position I want, so I can do that, right? Something like that. And now, like I said before, I mean, like you can go to a very low resolution, like the lowest you can find here. And either you can use the elastic brush to create that effect. So for example, like at intensity like 38 or something like that. Either you can do that to create a little bit more of the volume, or you can go with the clay build-up, because at this point in here, a lot of the information is going to be preserved anyway. So I can just inflate them, not inflate, but build up a little bit like that. But now we are actually just building like the positive version of it, right? So just like inflating them out. But what if I need to dig those ones deeper around those areas? So you're gonna do the same thing. Like you go to your standard, the one I had there before, and you see I have like this one that's like intensity 10, right? And they just have this little thin lines. I can actually go to a much bigger version of it, like that, 20, actually the size of it. So draw size like much bigger like that, and a very, very faint and small intensity. So I can go like, for example, like a very big size. Let's try it like that. And let's test here. So you see like in the nose, it's just like brings down like that. It's very, very, you know, subtle. So I can do that for those wrinkles. So I'm gonna go a little bit smaller. I'm just gonna dig in. I'm gonna do a little bit like that. Just establish those forms. And then we can actually refine them as we go. So basically, like again, building up in sculpting the secondary stuff, right? Not like necessarily the tertiary forms, but just like establishing those. So with a big brush like that, you can go all the way across, you know? It's like even here, I can start establishing some more forms and wrinkles, just like really defining with a big brush. Like that. And then same here, you know, it's like I can keep digging some stuff. So it's a combination of using the clay build-up and a large brush like that, just to define the secondary stuff. So let me see, just look at him for a second here and see what's going on with his face. Just build this one a little bit deeper. And then now that I have those ones established, let's do some of the fine stuff. And then for the fine stuff, in the case of his eyes here, what I'm noticing is that unlike that lady that she had like a kind of like a film kind of quality to it, right, that I mentioned before, this guy, he actually has a lot of bumps and crusts and things like that on his skin. But because I'm not too mean, I'm not going to sculpt like the crusty stuff. We're going to just make it a little bit prettier than that. But the breakup of the skin, I want to capture that just to get the same similar stuff. So I'm going to use again the skin random, that one I show you guys, this one. And I'm going to establish some of the directions again. So you see that I started adding those wrinkles in here just to add some direction. So I'm going to just reinforce them with those guys. Let me just make sure that I'm not going too over the board. So I'm going to keep intensity maybe at 10. And then I'm just going to establish that. It's still too big. I think the size of the brush is too big. Let's get smaller. So I'm going to go that way. And then going from the other side here, I'm going to start bringing them along the same direction. So going that way and then crossing over here, like changing direction in there. And then obviously you can smooth it out from time to time, just to make sure that it doesn't get too crusty. And then when I get around this area here, I can do a combination of using some direction like that, just establish like bigger ones, but then I can make it smaller and just go in circles like that and just really break up the surface before I go again, like back to the finer stuff, the finer wrinkles on top. Just like add some texture, like leathery texture in here. That's a similar one that I use for the nose actually, but at the tip of the nose actually, you know, make it a little bit smoother. Just gonna go around here, and then I'm gonna add a little texture right there, around here. And this texture, I can start licking it into those pores here as well, just to help like to merge them. But then there are a bunch of little micro wrinkles I'm gonna be adding here in this area just to help with the blend. So this one here, it doesn't look like much, but this type of stuff, now that when I start adding the other wrinkles on top of it, it's gonna really help. And I can even add some of that in here since we are here. Let's do symmetrical for now. So let's do symmetrical here. Just gonna add some of that detail. So at least when I render, it's not like a smooth surface, right? It's gonna just look awful and super shiny in the renders. This is gonna get a little bit of the breakup. Just a little leathery kind of detail in here. On the nose, let's break up a little bit in the middle again. I said like don't go over the same area, but unless you want to break it further, of course, if I need to, then you can go over. Do that. And then around here. And then obviously with the pores and the bumps and everything, this is gonna be much more interesting. But right now we're just defining like the primary, not the primary, but the base detail, right? So let's break up the symmetry here and just help those guys. Always in circles, right? Just to create this little leathery kind of effect. All the way down. Well, you get the idea. So it's basically the one I use for the nose and also for this area, for the eye bags. And then now let's go and do some actual sculpting. Stop goofing around and sculpt something. Let's do it. So let's establish those guys here. Let's see. Let's put intensity of, again, like maybe 10 or 12, something like that. And let's cut those guys. Maybe even further than that. Let's try 14. Can you believe I shut up for 5 seconds? And then obviously you're gonna start crossing those lines coming from outside. Never in a super long line, right? Always breaking things up.
Chris?
Yeah.
Does the thickness of the eyelids is not really that crisp, right? It has a really round aspect.
Yep.
Is it because of the age too?
Yeah, with the age they get a little bit more puffy, but I'm not gonna say this is like my finished eyelids. You know, this is I'm gonna be adding a pass. I'm gonna be showing next week. I'm gonna be adjusting a lot of stuff. When you have the eyeballs in place, this area here is gonna get a lot of love. You know, it's like I use like a flattened age polish brush just to really define the flat area at the top, and then add some more like bumps and bruises in here at the edge and make it a little bit sharper, but not by much because I'm an older guy. But definitely like don't worry too much about how puffy it looks because like I said, I keep tweaking those things all the way to the end. You know. Yeah, it's gonna look okay.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So let's get those guys. I'm starting to add like some smaller ones as well. Oh, you know, this is another bug from ZBrush that I hate. Look at this shit. So it creates those lines that cut across the entire thing. It only happens when you're using the lazy mouse. So sometimes like if you're getting to a tight angle, ZBrush interprets that you're trying to, you know, cross the, you know, it's like sculpt across the entire mesh. It happens to me a lot, actually, more than I wanted to. But it's a new bug. It's there just for like 10 years now. So, you know, it's like sometimes you're gonna get very deep ones. Again, breaking up, right? So always think about that. So, you know, it's like you're gonna pick some of them to turn into the hero ones, like I mentioned before. So for example, if I get this one here, I'm gonna keep going with it and probably like crossing across here and then breaking it up, trying to connect some dots. And then those guys as well. And then obviously try not to make everything super parallel to each other. So you can add some like changing direction a little bit more towards the middle here. And then even crossing over to create this kind of like cross hatching effect, right? And I could actually sculpt a lot of the stuff here in, symmetrically, but I'm actually gonna do everything asymmetrical just to make sure that both sides, they're not too similar. And then again, I'm gonna cross with some lines going this direction now. When I get to this corner here, then I'm gonna start changing direction slightly. And then start going more towards the middle here. I'm gonna pick one here a little bit stronger and then some smaller ones to cross over. Someone is making dinner in there. Just some noise. Let me just mute for now. Right. And let's go back here. Always like going towards that direction that I kind of like sketched before, right? So those guys here are gonna be going like more towards the outer part and crossing over and then bleeding into this area. And then when I get around here, then I'm gonna get more of those forms. I'm probably gonna have to build the secondary forms a little bit stronger than what I have in here. And I can always use the little micro detail to help me with that as well. And then it's a shame that I don't have my top eyelids completely visible in here because there's a lot of cross hatching that happens in there too. But in this case here, I only have like this fold on top of my eyelids, right? Very strong fold. So I'm gonna have to deal with this one instead. Those got a little bit graphic in there, but I can actually add a little crossing over and then play with that later. From time to time, you just pick one that you want to go stronger. So for example, like you get one around here, just like pick that one. Okay, let's go stronger with it and then fade it a little bit. Basically like using just the mouse pressure. And again, changing direction, right? Instead of like doing everything super parallel. And then when I get to this area here, sometimes you get some other directions happening here. So let's add a little bit of more of that. And like a cross hatching effect here. So I'm gonna go towards the middle. And then change direction again here. And normally, like at the very lid, I add the tiny little bumps in there. Uh, with Dick Smith, when I was experimenting with that model, I did a lot of interesting tests. For example, there was one point that I generated the XGen, and then I turned the entire mesh like into a single, assigned a single type of shader for it with ambient occlusion assigned to it. So when I render everything, it was basically like the hair and the skin was all ambient occlusion. And then I tweaked the ambient occlusion to have like a very, very small fall off. And then what that means is that everything that's rendered, for example, when it comes like to the hair itself that was assigned to the face, it got a tiny little shadow right matching the root of each one of the hairs, right? So there's a way in Arnold, which I'm gonna have to look again because when I did was, you know, last year, I don't remember how I did it, but there's a way in Arnold that you actually bake everything. So for example, if you have like a render with ambient occlusion, you can bake that into textures. So what I did, I actually generated a bunch of like the 5U dims I have for the entire face with the pass that was just like matching the roots of every one of the hairs in the scene. So that way I could actually go to Photoshop and blur those little hairs slightly and plug that map into my subsurface scattering map and just create that impression that the hair was actually going inside of the skin, right? So in this case here, for example, for the eyelid, it would be an interesting area to do it, you know. But after doing it, I started looking at the results, and I wasn't seeing a lot of it unless I was doing like super close-up stuff. So it's up to you guys. I mean, like it's the kind of stuff that's very interesting to test, you know. You can get a very subtle effect. But I mean, like I kind of like stopped doing it with that model, but I know it's possible to do it, you know. I did it before. I can even show you guys next time like the maps I have for Dick Smith. It was very interesting. Like I said before, I mean, like I have so much room for improving every single aspect of this entire thing, you know. Yeah, it's just like I kind of like stuck with something that was working for me. I kind of like didn't push too much, but for the skin, for example, the last class, I pushed the skin in a way that actually improved it. So that's why I share the settings straight away with you guys. And then once we have the maps painted, probably next week. Actually, the maps, let me remember. I don't know if next week is when we're going to be sculpting the iris for the eye and talking about that, or if it's texture time. So I'm going to double check that, but it's either one of them. So many things to take care of, right? Like it's when you're your own pipeline that we're going to end up like, you know, eventually doing all of it, but you know, it's going to take some time. So now from a distance here, it's starting to work, but I don't have any blends happening with the pores in here. So I'm gonna start doing some work in this area. So I'm gonna cut it across. I'm gonna try to find some neighbors in here, some of those little pores, like connecting the dots. Same here, gonna change direction slightly. Then I can cross over, so create some kind of like cross hatching here as well. Some of them are gonna travel like in parallel, more like that.
Chris, while you're brushing away those strokes, do you keep in a worry to vary the pressure while you stroke those brushes?
I definitely do. For example, like some of them are going to start very strongly and then going to fade them away, and then some of them are going to keep like a constant pressure. But it's always like, yeah, thinking about it, you know. So when I'm connecting those dots, I start very strongly close to this area here, the connection. And then when I get a little bit further, I'm going to start like fading them around there, you know. So definitely there's pressure involved.
I'm pretty sure that plays a huge role in applying those organic aspects to those brushes, to those strokes.
Yeah, like I said before, some stuff that's overlooked is like the pressure and the direction, right? The way that you apply stuff. There is a lot of your own style that comes with this type of exercise, you know. For example, like if you're seeing like someone who is a 2D artist, the way that they use like the pressure sensitivity, for example, like with a tablet, you can see like sometimes you can see a lot of the style of the guy, just the way that he draws like the main lines, you know, it's like of the silhouette. And then with ZBrush or sculpting in general, there's a lot to be said about the gesture, you know. The gesture is very important. how you apply your stuff, how you sculpt things, you know. It's very fun to do and to learn. So now we start getting a little bit more of a blend in that area, right? So it's not just like the pores are simply like stopping and something else is starting. So to do that, if you remember, I added a little bit of that micro wrinkles coming this direction. And I'm just like, you know, establishing some of the wrinkles crossing over, you know, basically like trying to create some kind of like nice transition between those two areas. So like I'm gonna pick some of those pores and I'm just gonna cross over and try to connect the next ones, but like in a very controlled way, right? Very around there. And this is actually at my highest resolution, which is like 26 million polygons for just for the mask. And ZBrush is handling like a champ. Actually doing a very good job. So again, like I'm establishing those forms, but at some point you're gonna notice that, okay, that's a little flat. Maybe I can use a little bit more of a, you know, it's like a little bit more form in there. So at any time you can switch to your clay buildup. Just go back a couple of subdivision levels, right? Let's say this one, maybe like one subdivision level more. And then I'm gonna just build up some of those. Not by much, because sometimes this area here is fairly flat when it comes like to the relationship between those wrinkles in between each other. But at least like to get a little bit more form in here. Just gonna build up some of them in between. And I'm using pressure sensitivity for this as well. So instead of like going full on, full power, just picking my battles here and just like in certain areas, adding more pressure right in the middle of those little bellies, right around the middle of the, you know, where the wrinkles meet. And then eventually just like crossing over, for example, like from here all the way. Especially this area here, that's a good point, good place to actually do those little bridges that I mentioned before with the clay buildup. So around here, I can actually just go to town, actually blend them to start like creating this tension, you know, between here and the inner parts in there. Just create that little tension thing. And then now we can go and add some more bumps in here, because those ones we just added very randomly, but we can pick some of them. And let's say if I saved, I believe I did pore depth and then pimple elastic. Cool. So that's the one we need. So here, let me look at his face in there. He has some around here. And then obviously, I'm not going to do too much here, but my plan is to actually add some of them in here, right? This area, because at the end of the day, you're going to add the eyelashes in there. And you know, even that I did with those maps that I have for Dick Smith. I was able to actually track where the pimples, the ambient occlusion was, and actually build the pimples right there on the dot. You know, it's like the other thing that actually for that, in that case, I didn't use the ambient occlusion. I used the actual geometry, because my eyelashes before this last class, I was actually using geometry, so I had everything in polygons, and you know that's the way I did the eyelashes in the past. But in the last class, I did everything with the XGen. It turned out really well. So if that's the case here, if you want to match the hairs, then you can use like an ambient occlusion to match them. So again, I'm going to do like some of them like smaller, some going to be bigger, and then changing size and intensity, right? Because you want to add like some variations. So some of them are going to be very faint. That's my favorite word today. I use many times, faint. And you see like, even this area here of the caruncle is pretty bad in terms of shape. It's supposed to be very well defined and rounded and everything. But you know, it's like, I'm a mess. I do everything at the same time because I want to see results, you know? So once I finish this thing here, I'm gonna do a render tonight and post whatever I have done for this area in the pores. And then with that, I can actually start seeing, okay, what I need to do, what's my focus next, you know? And then I might think like, okay, that's the eyelid. I need to do some refinements in there. But my objective with the eyelids and this entire area of the caruncle and everything is once we start sculpting the iris and adding the eyeball to our models, then I'm gonna start like worrying too much about it, you know, and just like making sure that the connection between the two pieces is perfect. Another thing we're gonna be doing when we have the eyeball in here, we're gonna add the eyeball, and then we're gonna hide everything but the eyelids. So this one is the top one. And we're gonna make sure that the top eyelid is actually following the contours of the eyeball. It's almost like an offset to the eyeball, right? Imagine there's a thickness of the skin, and then the eyeball is actually pressing everything against the skin, right? So we're gonna have like almost like a perfect offset between the eyelid itself and the eyeball. But to do that, I did some eyeballs in here, and I can tell that I have some intersections happening already here. So I'm gonna have to resolve the intersection first by pulling this skin out, and then adding the eyeball, isolating everything, and then showing you guys how I do this offset in there. And then obviously, I mean, like if you had your eyelids uncovered, unlike mine here, so they would probably like go up in offset with the eyeball, but then around this area here, we would have to create some kind of like a stretching, right? And it would create a blend, so it would not be like a perfect, you know, wrinkle against the eyeball. Although with this guy here, let's see, with Dick Smith, let's see if I can find a close render. Let's see, date. Oh, I have a lot of renders in there. So Artstation back now, no, that's not it. Okay, date. Let's see if I can find one that has the very clear. Yeah, this one you might be able to see it. So you see, like it follows the contour of the eyelid, but then there's a secondary fold in there just to add a more naturalistic look to it, right? But it basically, like, you have to read as if the eyeball is actually pressing the skin, right? And because that's actually what's happening in real life. But then here, like I said, it's not like a perfect offset that goes all the way across, and all of a sudden you have this little perfect sphere of skin, right? No, you're gonna have like those extra folds, and then you're gonna have to imagine the offset's gonna happen all the way until it meets another area like this one, and then you're gonna have like the extra folds of the skin, right? And same for the eye bags, you know, it's like you're gonna have like an offset from the eyeball itself, but then you have all the saggy skin and the deposits of fat and things like that. So obviously it's gonna inflate things and create more forms, right? But you have to always think about like the eyeball pressing the skin and to create those forms. So let's go back here and do some more sculpting. That area look a little funny in there. Actually, what I'm gonna do here, I noticed that he has some more pull in some areas. So my standard brush here, instead of like using negative, you're gonna use the positive version of it. So I'm gonna just switch to positive. And I'm gonna reduce my intensity. And I'm gonna build in some folds in here. So something like that. That looks a little bit more like a thin skin. Build it like that. And then maybe dig a little bit deeper around there, and then add another one. Always like in a very, you know, like you said, like using the pressure sensitivity, just to make sure that you're getting the effect you want. You know, you start like, instead of like going super strong, I go very, very like soft with the form, and then I build up as I keep going, right? Even around this area here, for example, if I think about what's going on underneath it, you have to imagine that there's the eyelid is actually pressing against this whole region, right? The way I built this, it's a little bit too low. If you're looking at this whole area here, like in some of the reference I saw, this is higher, so I'm gonna be opening up his eyes a little bit more. But then obviously, if you have like the eyelid underneath, so you're probably gonna have something like, let's say, like if I do very strongly so you can see here, probably like a form like that, you know, it's like slightly, just like a little volume around this area here and a little bit of depth around there. But yeah, I'm gonna have to check the position of the eyelids before I do anything, so it actually makes any sense. And then here again, I'm actually defining some of those forms, like the secondary stuff, even at this level here, right? Because I'm like 1.6 million, so I can actually add some of that. And then I'm gonna cut this one across, add a little form in there like this, very, very softly, and then cut it again. Build some more in there. And you're slowly trying to get that look that he has in there. This one is still not very convincing. I think this form here needs some more work. Just gonna cut it a little further and then get some of those wrinkles deeper as well. Especially those guys here. And sometimes you get a secondary kind of like a set of wrinkles that goes parallel to the eye bagging here. In his case, he doesn't have one. In the case of Stan Winston, he has one. But what happens as well, if you have any type of squint, sometimes you get this area here to build up as well. So I'm noticing this in his portrait. So I'm going to go to the lowest resolution, 400. And then I'm going to build up this area here in a very irregular way, actually. Instead of like having a perfect line, I'm going to make it a little bumpy. Around here. It's erasing a little bit of the pores, but that can be very desirable in this area because I want to make sure that we are making the transition to a smoother area with more wrinkles than pores. So I'm not going to care too much about that. One thing that ZBrush, that Arnold does very well is actually areas where you have those little bumps like that, those little pimples. The scatter is beautiful. It really makes them look translucent in the renders. You can see like some beautiful stuff. Let's see if my scene here, my folder actually refreshed. If I can see like the old close-ups I had for this guy. Let's see. I had like a series of like just eye renders. This was like back in the day, like a year and a half ago, which is an eternity. And maybe we can try this. Look, I use this little software here that's called XNView. And this little software can open basically like any type of image format. There's a bunch of softwares like that, but I like this one for some reason. So let's see if I can find one, like a close-up of the eye. There's one here, for example. It's like a bunch of different tests I did. This is like, yeah, this is too small. Let's see, let's get a little bigger. Let's see what type. Looks a little small, but yeah, this one I remember had some of the little pimples in here. That was the translucency was pretty cool, but maybe I'm judging using like an old example too. Yeah, this one is more like I think this one was more about the little veins that I added some green veins and things like that. But I remember it was scattering pretty nicely some of that. And this is not even the new algorithm that we are using for Arnold, right? Like the random walk 2. This was the old one, and it was already working very nicely. But this one is even more impressive for, you know, it's like bumps and bruises like that, like little bumps. I think you guys gonna really dig the results once you start doing like some close-up renders. And by the way, the close-up renders of the skin, some of you guys are doing, it's pretty amazing already. So don't worry about it. That we are in the right direction.
Man, I badly can't believe that was a CGI render. Chris, let me ask you one thing. Why do you prefer using the standard brush with the Alpha 39 over the popular DEM standard one?
Oh yeah, the DEM standard, I know you can tweak it, but by default, it carves and pinches at the same time. And it adds some kind of like effect that I don't quite appreciate. For example, like if I'm exporting my displacement maps, I want to make sure that everything is sculpted facing the normals instead of like pulling things together. You know, it's like I had this problem many times. Like for the same reason, I was not using the inflate at 10, for example, that basically like pinches things together and then makes the displacement explode from the inside. I kind of like had similar stuff like, you know, it's like if I tried to use the DEM standard in getting this pinch, you know, it's like basically like the surface moving towards, you know, the middle. But I don't know, like it seems like he released another version of DEM standard. That one might be better, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I haven't tried the new one yet.
Yeah. because he might have like, because I believe like you can still tweak it, right? Like to remove the pinching from it. But for some reason, I just got used to just like building my own like little standard modified, and it just does what I need, you know, it just carves, and that's it. I'm pretty old school. You guys, you young kids with those new tools these days.
Okay. With the old school stuff for them.
So let's another thing I can do here, because I'm noticing like there's some extra bumpiness in his eye bags. I'm just gonna add that little which one is that, skin pores random that I had before. Just gonna do a little bit of that. Let's see how random I can get this. Yeah, that's going in, so let's pull as pimples instead. Let's do that. Yeah, it goes a little faster. Get a little bit there too. And then with the detail on top, it should work fine. And then even spread some around here very carefully. Add some pimples around there. Up eyelid, a little bigger maybe. Something like that. Very carefully. That's too much. I know that he has some interesting forms around here. It's very asymmetrical, so I'm gonna definitely break the symmetry since I'm already, you know, it's like sculpting everything asymmetrically. So now I can go to town in this area and just make the asymmetry broken, so I can actually crook his nose a little bit. Because my main concern normally to keep the symmetry is to actually be able to sculpt, especially this area here. You know, it's like the muzzle and the cheeks, and then the chin, and also the forehead. So basically, like before I break the symmetry too crazy here, I'm gonna sculpt the pores around here and then the forehead. And then once I have the pores in place, I can just go to town and then break the symmetry and do whatever I want at that point, because all the sculpting is gonna be symmetrical from that point on. And then just to finish up here, because we are pretty close in time, I'm gonna be keeping doing basically the same thing I'm doing, like I said before. But let's do some of the pimples again in the nose, because now I removed them and he has plenty of pimples in his nose. So it's gonna be a good candidate for that. I remember I have this brush here that I showed you guys before. Let's just review it again. Let's see, pimple. I have so many here now, I'm starting to get confused. I'm gonna need that plugin that actually organizes things for me. So the alpha here is basically alpha 39 as usual, with drag rectangle. And then again, like my curve looks like this. I showed this one in another class. So this is the tip of the pimple. This one goes in the skin. This is what comes out of the skin at around 50%. And then I use the mid value at 50% to actually compensate for that. So this one is very useful for this type of stuff, because you can just go right in the middle in there, just like bloop, put a little pimple right there, here too. Some areas don't even need anything else, just that one, it already creates the little depression for you. Just like with the size of the pores, right? The only thing to be careful here is about the scale, of course. You're not gonna do like a pimple like this big, right? Unless you wanna do like a pimple mixed with a mole. But then just making sure that, you know, it's like you can add variation, obviously, like some very tiny ones and then some bigger ones, but don't go too crazy with the size of it. Just add some like randomly. And then when you get more towards the bottom of it, it's almost like you try to avoid using too many in the bottom. They're gonna be forming mostly in this area here anyway. And then very spread out, you're gonna get some like eventually like around there, you know, it's like kind of like not higher than this probably, so something around here. And then from this point here, you're gonna start seeing them again showing up like around the forehead, right? But then obviously like the human body is it's something, right? So you're gonna see them in different places, but I would say like this area here is gonna be the mother lode, more towards the tip of the nose. Add some down, and obviously like on the sides too, right? You're gonna definitely get some here. I get them myself. Yeah, I love those little cleaning kits, you know, you're just like, I don't know if you saw those ones. I borrowed one from my wife at some point, and then I started using them. Now I steal them from her. Basically, like it's a little strip you put in there, and then you put the strip with water, so they're wet, and then they kind of like have some kind of like a chemical in there that makes everything hard. So you just put on top, cover this whole area, and then it kind of like almost like freezes them, you know, like, so when you pull the strip, they all like is stuck to it. They look like fur. So you look against the light, they look like fur because there's so many and so thin, you know. And then when you look at your nose, it's like a baby's butt. So it's great. Highly recommended. So yeah, like the thing about that, when things start getting more interesting is when you start adding variation, right? Like today was all about adding variation and changes of skin types, right? We're gonna still have to do work around lips. So we're gonna go through that. But for example, like from this side here, that's everything so plain, right? Now we start looking at this side here. Now we have some more interesting wrinkles starting to show up, but obviously gonna get more interesting. And then you have difference in skin right here in the nose now. You have to create the blending here, which is going to be the same kind of principle, right? You're going to smooth out some of those guys. You're going to start coming with those little details here and invading that area a little bit further. And then at the same time, bringing some of those pores and bringing them closer to this area, but start spreading them out a little bit more until they become almost like little pimples, you know? So creating a kind of like a nice little blend between those two areas, similar to what we did in here. So that's going to be another thing you're going to be doing next. This guy, he had a ton of those guys. So at some point, for example, like the same way I did with the skin, right? If I have all those little guys already in place, if I want to make sure that some of them are a little bit deeper, I can just go back into resolution like that, right? I can just pick one here. Let's say the pimple, the pore depth elastic, the one we created today. Just pick that one guy. Just gonna go like, oh, that's the opposite. Let's go deeper with that. And then let's pick another one here. Let's see that guy. Maybe something else. Let's see that guy right there. Go deeper. And then when you bring back in resolution, should be a little bit squashed in there, but still should work. Let's go back. Yeah, so they are a little bit deeper into the skin now, right? That little guy in there. So yeah, so I think we are good for today. I hope today was a little bit less boring than yesterday. Some days going to be a little bit more interesting. But the important thing, I guess, is like it's just showing the little techniques I use for this kind of stuff, like for creating the mid-resolution stuff and then the finer detail. There's a lot of other stuff you can do with it, you know, using a combination of those brushes I mentioned. And obviously adding more bumps and bruises and things like that. I'm gonna create more of like a cross-hatching kind of pattern around here using similar technique I used already in here. And then everything else is gonna be about like blending some stuff and hopefully showing some, either like a screenshot of ZBrush with the current progress in about, I don't know, like an hour and a half from now. Or maybe a little render, you know, something I can post on Instagram because it's taking too long. So thanks again, guys, and I see you guys in the forums at the group, and also tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be the 8th lesson, and that's basically like halfway there, right? I'm going to be posting something probably tonight or tomorrow morning about the reviews happening this Saturday. So you guys can have like a space. It's going to be like a Google Drive. You can actually drop your files in there. And you're going from there. So I'm going to post something. So stay tuned between today and tomorrow. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.